Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back, everybody, to Fighting on Film. This week is a carry-on from our feature on homebrew history.
Which was great fun.
It was World War II TV. It was Joe and Bo of Homebrew. It was yours truly and Matt. We had a blast just going through that film with a bit of a tooth comb. But we hadn't had enough. We thought we'd go into the Bulge again and just go in a little more in depth of what we thought about that quote-unquote movie. So once again, I'm joined by Matthew Moss of the Armourer's Bench.
Hello guys. Fair warning, there are probably going to be some exasperated expletives peppered throughout this episode. So yeah, we're gonna take a look at this quote-unquote classic, to steal Robbie's line from before we start recording. And we're going to look at the Battle of the Bulge, which is a 1965 3-hour-long epic.
Yeah, it's a long one. And you feel that 3 hours.
You do.
Oh,
it's
God.
a bit of a slog.
Mm.
So the film's kind of one of those films that historians love to hate, I think.
Yeah.
And if you heard our podcast with Homebrew and Paul of World War II TV, then you know that there was plenty of sort of frustration with how this film portrays the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah. It's just a mess.
It is on a number of levels. Like we even on that podcast, we even tried to like come up with some thoughts on how it redeems itself. But honestly, we were kind of grasping at straws.
It was tough.
It was. So it has a stellar cast.
Yeah, I mean it's got big hitters, big names. You know, Robert Shaw, Henry Fonda, Robert Ryan, Telly Savalas,
Dana Andrews.
Don't know the guy's name, but the Tiger Tank Commander from Kelly's Heroes, he's in it.
He is, very briefly, as like a Panzer Grenadier major, isn't he?
Very briefly.
Yeah. And Hans Christian Black is in there too.
And it's one of those big budget films. Pack the film full of names, pick a genre out of the hat, and pick a plot out of the hat, it would seem, and make a big war epic and hope no one notices that it's rubbish and everyone just goes to see it.
Yeah, it's a very hit and miss movie.
But you've got some great performances in there, haven't you?
We have. Like, there's some solid performances. There's some interesting things that they were hinting at historically, but sort of completely missed the mark on.
Mm.
It was directed by Ken Anakin, who directed the British and French elements of The Longest Day. So looking at just the director's name, you would think, oh, okay,
he'll do
Longest Day
job.
pedigree. That's good, you know.
Yeah.
Because Longest Day is a pretty decent film. So you would think, wow, okay, an epic on the Battle of the Bulge, yes, please.
Mm.
And it's in ultra wide.
Cinerama, a new widescreen format I think they were playing around with. It might actually be one of the first movies to use it. It's quite a big budget piece for the day. I think it's like upwards of $5 million or something. You know, it's not small money for the time. And it shows, like, you know, they are putting a lot of money on the screen, showing off a lot of things, all the wrong things.
Yes, and that's one of the issues with the film, isn't it? Like, almost every vehicle shown on screen is completely incorrect, be
or
it
in
from
the wrong colour or...
yeah.
Oh, God.
Be it from like a 1950s Cessna standing in for like a Lysander.
Yeah.
Down to infamously would be, the King Tigers being portrayed by M48 Patton tanks.
And the Chaffees and the Shermans. They're like Vietnam era tanks, aren't they? The Pattons.
Yeah, they're Cold War. They're like 50s, 60s era tanks.
Oh, yeah,
and for people that know a little bit about World War II vehicles and, that kind of thing, you instantly recognize. And Battle of the Bulge isn't the only film to do that. And it is forgivable because, the climactic end battle is on a pretty big scale. There's a tank battle at the end of the movie, which entails probably like 24 tanks.
Yeah.
And there just aren't that many running Shermans and King Tigers around by 1965.
The thing is, there would have been enough Panzers, and there probably would have been enough Shermans if you'd have really looked.
The trouble is getting them all to Spain.
Ah, yes.
Because of course you would film a Battle of the Bulge film in Spain.
Yes.
That this is one of the key, one of my key things with the film is a film portraying a battle in the depths of winter. There is very little snow.
Barely any snow.
It's amazing how much southern Spain does not look like the Ardennes.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. If they were fighting in Italy, maybe
Yeah,
you could get away with it. Yeah, if they were fighting on the Gothic line, you might get on away with
right.
it. Maybe in certain sections where it's a bit muddy and there's a little bit of
Yeah,
snow.
and there's some trees.
Well, take for instance the forest scene. That could be the Ardennes.
Yes, that's
I
passable.
wasn't
There's a
really
fair bit of snow on the ground.
exactly. But then that part where Robert Shaw, who plays the main Nazi bastard, we haven't quite made that clear, but he's your main man, your main antagonist. When he gets his King Tigers, quote unquote,
Mhm.
that painfully is in the courtyard of a load of villas in the middle of summer in Spain.
So I suppose the best thing to do would be to sort of like run down some of the main characters that we're going to talk about before we get fully into it. So we have Robert Shaw as a sort of Piper / Rommel-esque character who's like
Yeah.
a Nazi panzer commander.
That's it. We called him Pommel on the homebrew, didn't we?
Yeah, Pommel.
Pommel.
Then we have Henry Fonda as an American intelligence lieutenant colonel who believes that there's going to be an offensive, but no one will believe.
You got to listen to me.
Then we have Robert Ryan, who is an American divisional commander. Then we have Dana Andrews, who is sort of Henry Fonda's foil. He's his superior officer in the intelligence corps who just does not believe there is going to be a Nazi offensive. And then we have Charlie Bronson, who is a grizzled infantry major who pops up throughout the film. And that's about it, really. They're the major characters.
Yeah, and then you get like odd hangers on, like a lieutenant and a sergeant.
Yes.
And you get Telly Savalas's tank commander. For me, apart from Robert Shaw and his mate, Conrad,
played by Hans Christian Black.
Every single other character is interchangeable.
Yeah.
I didn't know who was who half the time. It pains me to say it. I found it really hard to keep up with who was who. If I didn't know the actors by the look of them, it was just generic army man number one, generic GI number two. No one was a standout apart from Shaw and Conrad because they were on screen the most.
It's definitely focused around their relationship.
Yeah, I found it a very jarring watch in that regard. So I was like, hang on a minute, who's your main characters then? We don't spend enough time with Robert Shaw for it to be solely about him, but we don't spend enough time with Henry Fonda or Robert Ryan for it to be completely about the American side. There's balancing issues all the way through it.
There is. And for a 3-hour film, there is more than enough time to set up all these characters in a way that we feel connected to them, but we don't. Let's take the infantry lieutenant and the sergeant, for instance. We follow a US unit which meets the Germans first, so they're the point of contact in the line where the German offensive breaks through. And we get introduced to this sort of lackadaisical lieutenant that pays no interest in what his men are doing because it's cold and they're in the bunker and it's nearly Christmas and the war's nearly over.
And they wouldn't know that either, which really annoyed me.
No, they wouldn't. They sort of say, well, on the radio it's saying the war's nearly over. Like, I don't know whether they would have just assumed that. I don't know. And then we have his gung-ho sort of sergeant who's like, wants to take the men out for drill, wants to go on patrol, wants to actually like be a soldier, more or less. And that sort of bumps up against this lieutenant who doesn't want to be a soldier, quite clearly. So the battle begins and the lieutenant is clearly absolutely useless. And eventually he ends up getting most of his platoon killed, and him and the sergeant are eventually captured later on. That character, it doesn't evolve or there's no development of the character. It jumps from personality trait to personality trait, and there's a lack of character cohesion across the whole cast, basically.
Or it's like little vignettes of scenes, like apart from a few very, very key scenes, there's no standout parts of the movie. They're all like little sketches almost.
Yeah.
And I think for the American side, at least, I never feel like they're a cohesive part of the film.
We see like probably 2/3 of the cast is the American side, and we have the only Germans we really see are Robert Shaw's character, the Panzer Commander, and Hans Christian Black. They're the sole two German characters that like have any kind of sounding board off one another. Whereas the Americans, they don't have sounding boards off one another. There's no like interaction between a lot of the characters.
No.
So with Henry Fonda's character, he's trying to convince the generals or his commanding officer that there's going to be a German offensive, and they just flatly just don't believe him.
No, they don't. And that's your plot, isn't it? Oh, there's not going to be an attack. Oh, there is. Oh, there's not. Oh, there is. And then lo and behold, there is an attack.
And at least I think the reason why the German side becomes more prominent is because the film kind of has something to say there. It's discussing. So you have Conrad, Hans Christian Black's character, voicing his he's war weary. He's been in since 1940. He's tired. He's been on the Eastern Front. He's been on the Western Front. He doesn't want to be a soldier anymore. He doesn't want his children to be soldiers. Whereas Hessler is ardent. He's an ardent Nazi. He believes in war. He wants to fight. Yeah. He enjoys fighting. He lives for fighting. He's the ace panzer commander.
Well, he's like a commando book villain.
Yeah, he's kind of a caricature in that respect.
Hessler from hell.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be that issue's name. And they have this sort of back and forth where Conrad's like, I don't want my children to be fighting a perpetual war. And Hessler's like, the best thing that we can hope for is perpetual war.
And I'm like, what the fuck? I was just like, what is he talking about?
Wow, okay. That's the only part of this film that has anything to actually say. One of the things we talked about on Homebrew Histories podcast was how weird it was that they took the Battle of the Bulge and then proceeded to not tell the story of the Battle of the Bulge.
So stupid, yeah.
So we see Bastogne, the most famous part of the Battle of the Bulge, with the commander of the town saying nuts, we're not going to surrender. They shoehorn that in purely because they wanted to get the iconic nuts line.
Your movie should be centered around Bastogne, for God's sake. That's your film. That has a narrative.
It's not like the battle has any shortage of interesting things going on.
There are so many encirclements. There are so many amazing stories.
Individual unit actions that are just fascinating.
For research for this pod, I watched a 70s documentary that the British Army made about the Ardennes offensive. There's so many parts in that where I'm like, oh wow, everything you look at has something interesting to say. Yet this movie has nothing interesting to say.
No, it doesn't leave you wanting to then go and look into the battle, because it kind of just leaves you thinking, oh, okay.
It's someone has a book on the Battle of the Bulge. They haven't read it properly. They've read the blurb, or they've looked at the contents page and gone, right, I'm going to make a movie about the Battle of the Bulge now. Right, here's my checklist. I've got German commando infiltrators, check. I've got mass German panzers, check. I've got embittered but very, very hard fighting defensive American action, check. I've got snow, sort of, check. That's kind of what it feels like half the time. No one sat down and gone, right, we need a coherent narrative here because this is a big war epic movie. And fuck it, we just have loads of explosions.
As I was saying, there is a lack of cohesion within the characters. There's also a lack of cohesion within the larger plot. So the whole plot seems to be there's going to be a German offensive, but they need to reach a fuel dump to enable that offensive to actually be a success.
Mirage in the desert, millions of gallons of fuel dump.
The writers of the film have clearly gone okay, there was a fuel shortage for the Wehrmacht. They needed fuel. Fuel dump. The whole film is going to be revolving around getting to a fuel dump. There we go.
But that will only become clear maybe 2 hours into the film.
That's not correct.
Not
historically. They went. No. The whole point of the campaign was not to capture fuel.
Germans capturing massive supply halls was not uncommon during that action. The main thrust was towards Antwerp, try and take a port to cut the Allies in half.
They explain that at the beginning, but then all we follow is Hessler's panzers.
Quickly do away with it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's made clear that Hessler's armored spearhead is all we're going to see of the German offensive, and that's it, which is fine, fair enough, if they'd done it properly.
Before we go into parts that we want to talk about in more depth, it feels like a film. I think, Matt, you'll agree, it's a movie that for some reason someone decided it was going to be an epic, but it actually needed to be a small studio piece a la Battleground.
It needed to be more focused, definitely.
Yeah, because you can tell a much better story about the way the Ardennes was fought by doing it smaller.
Honestly, if you compare this to Battle of the Bulge to, say, Bridge Too Far, A Bridge Too Far is shorter and does a better job of showing a hugely ambitious sort of campaign and battle than this does. So if you take Charlie Bronson's character, the grizzled army major, he begins the film as someone who's war weary, and then has a sort of rant about how much he hates the Germans, which is fair enough, definitely
Yeah.
a feature. But then later on, he sort of like becomes like lighthearted and jokey, and he's like,
Yeah.
there's a scene where they're fortifying the fictional town of Amblev, which is actually like the town itself doesn't exist. It's a local river. They just picked the name and decided to make
Probably
Amblev.
because they knew full well they were making it up.
Yes, I think that's very true. And he's basically like running around trying to rally everyone. He's like, get your rifles, lunch is over. He's got these like snappy little lines. He's like, you're in the infantry now.
Yeah, the cooks. But we're making dinner. Oh, you're in the infantry now, kid.
Some of the best parts of the film are like Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson scenes where they're like, they're having a bit of repartee, and they're chatting, and he's like, last time I needed a rifle and you handed me a rifle, and he's like, here, take mine, and and it's like those are some of like the only American scenes where you get any kind of like back and forth that isn't just either exposition or pointless.
I even think the scenes with the non-Americans, the infiltration commandos under Otto Skorzeny, their scenes with the other Americans at the bridge is way more interesting because they're pretending to be American, but they're doing a better fucking job of it than the American characters in the bloody film. But they famously didn't do as much as this movie purports them to do. And I think this is
kind of makes them look like linchpin element, doesn't it? But
we were saying beforehand, well, I was saying to you that this film is dangerous because it presents fiction as fact.
It does,
but it's done it such a long time ago and been one of those films that gets wheeled out again and again and again because it's a big epic. You can stick it on Channel 4 at like 3:00 in the afternoon. You've got a certain amount of people for like 3 hours.
But whereas Longest Day and Bridge Too Far are forgivable. Like at least they have historical accuracy sort of within them.
Exactly.
This is just, there's only the most tiny kernel grain of like...
Well, it's like the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Yes.
The facts this movie, on the myths this movie purports, are really bad. Like, it wasn't about fuel. It's annoying from watching it as someone who studies history. It pisses me off.
And that's what makes it one of these films that historians love to hate. The entirety of the film is very slow. For what is supposed to be a fast-paced campaign, it's quite slow. There isn't a shot fired until an hour into the film.
It's very preamble, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have to explain where we are. We have to explain what we're doing.
Exactly. And then when we do like have some action sequences, they're very sort of oddly choreographed. The infantry ones, the tank battle at the end is interesting. It's not very super accurate, but it's interesting. Infantry like pirouetting when they get hit, or people running around not knowing what they're doing.
Everyone sort of falls down like they're trying to do the Olympic gymnastics. It's really off-putting, and it is. Especially when the Malmedy massacre is shown. That really jars me, really rubs me up the wrong way.
That's one of the scenes that I was going to bring up that I really don't like. I don't like how they used probably one of the worst war crimes on in the Northwestern Europe theatre as a plot point. It's not even like a significant plot point. There's a scene which is supposed to be hard-hitting, following that with Hessler and Charles Bronson's character, where Charles Bronson's been captured, and he sort of like tries to push Hessler to perhaps like shoot him, to make sure his men were safe.
Yeah.
But I just thought, well, this is very weird way of handling this awful massacre
brutal
that happened.
War crime.
Yeah, like 200 plus men were killed, I think, and it just sort of it's odd. It's an odd scene.
Well, there was multiple atrocities committed by Piper's division. Choosing to use that part of the movie to get a character out of that situation so they can turn up later on in the film is fucking wrong. This movie could have alluded to it, but not shown it, or it could have shown it, but just
in a more tasteful way, in a way which would have been more impactful.
And that's where the movie for me just loses all credibility. Because after that, I was like, you know what? If they're going to do that, then fuck the rest of this film. It was quite upsetting, really.
I can definitely agree with that.
Well, that's the most impassionate thing we've ever got onto, really,
Exactly.
on the pod so far.
So moving on from the massacre scene, we should probably discuss some of the other scenes that we wanted to discuss in a little bit more detail. So for me, one that jumps out is in the first hour of the film. There's a scene where Hessler's being basically the operational plan is being explained to him. He's taken into this side room where there's a load of models.
Airfix kit?
Giant Airfix kits sprayed silver.
1/5 scale.
There's sort of engineering models that you like see of like prototype cars. He sort of like points to a generic jet of like the 50s shape and goes, "This is the new ME-262. We have squadrons of these."
Yeah, I'm like, no, you don't. I'm like, no, you don't.
No. And then he points to like the V1 and the V2 models, which
they don't too bad. Yeah.
They look more like what they're supposed to be than anything else in this room. The ME-262 looks nothing like an ME-262.
No.
And the King Tiger that they then turn to looks absolutely nothing like a King Tiger, which we'll get to in a second. But anyway, so he's talking to Hessler and he says, yeah, the V1 has already destroyed 20% of London. Which no, it hasn't. Even the Luftwaffe hasn't destroyed 20% of London. And then he turns to the new King Tiger, and he's like, "This is the new King Tiger tank. We'll have hundreds of these, if not more.
20% more armor, 50% better gun." It's like really sort of selling it, isn't he? You might as well get the fucking brochure out and be like, "The King Tiger is better in many respects to the normal Tiger."
Has Sir considered the new King Tiger? And
it's the King Tiger, new from Porsche.
And Hessler's like, it's a lovely model.
It just doesn't give a shit, though. It's like,
it is a lovely model, but it's a model of a Patton tank. It isn't a King Tiger. And the poor art department has clearly had to make a model
fiberglass Patton tank,
a fiberglass silver Patton tank, purely because that's what they're calling the King Tiger. And you're thinking, oh,
but they could have made that model a real King Tiger, and I wouldn't have been annoyed that when they showed the tanks they had were Pattons, because I'd be like, oh, okay, that's as close as they could get, that's fine. But because they show a Patton, I'm like, what is this Patton Appreciation Society? But I think the funniest thing for me in that scene is Robert Shaw just doesn't care.
No, he doesn't. He's sort of unbelieving until he gets shown the tanks.
Wow.
He's like, I'm not going to believe anything that you're saying until I've seen the tanks. And then he's shown the tanks, and it's quite clearly in a square full of villas in Spain. And it is not war-torn.
In the middle of blazing heat.
Eastern Germany, Western Germany.
But that whole scene is just staged weird, because he goes, oh, please, come to my war room, sort of thing.
Well, it's half an hour of exposition, isn't it, for explaining the whole operational plan.
He sort of motions over, and then the room sort of opens up, but they were there the whole time. And I'm like, so Robert Shaw's already seen these models. He must have clocked them.
That's true.
It's just
was he being polite and not asking about the models because he knew he was going to be showing them, or was he
just like, models? Don't ask about models. Don't ask about the models.
Don't. This is a nice painting you have. That's a lovely chandelier.
Oh, I love this map of the Ardennes. Got any plans?
Yeah, so that's one of the scenes I'm like, that's kind of an early warning that this film is not going to be
fantastic. No. But props to the amount of tanks they had. Yeah, they didn't just keep using the same.
I mean, there's very few films of the day that, could boast over a dozen
tanks.
If
you've seen any footage of the Ardennes proper, there is the same footage of the same King Tiger going down the same road, or the same Panzer going up the same ravine. At least they didn't just fall back on stock footage and it not sort of fit in. At least they went for their own. We're going to do our own.
Well, they must have had to have done, it would have just looked completely out of step with
really
that
weird
ultra wide aspect they were going for.
For me, it has to be the chocolate cake scene. And I know you're thinking, what? Chocolate cake in a war film? What? Just before the intermission, yes, this film has a fucking intermission, which is preposterous.
We're definitely going to have to mark this one as explicit, ladies and gentlemen, because it's incensed, Robbie.
Sorry. It's just really grandiose filmmaking to have an intermission in your 3-hour-long movie. I know how long the movie is. I don't need you to remind me. Anyway, so Robert Shaw, his superior, are in Robert Shaw's little caravan.
Like, where does he come from? Where's
Yeah,
the
he just
general arrive
turns
from?
up from Berlin, I assume.
I assume they were in Berlin,
It
but
doesn't tell you where they are.
no. Like, one minute he's seen like in the
The Führer bunker, you know.
yeah, like discussing the
Yeah.
plan and being told nuts by the
Yeah. And then he's on the front line.
commandant of Bastogne,
Yeah.
and then the next one he turns up right at the front line, like at the spearhead unit.
Exactly, like literally maybe half an hour away from the fighting. So Robert Shaw's like, oh, we're doing quite well, and the major goes, no, you're behind schedule. What's the matter? Time is so important to this attack.
Yeah.
He keeps getting it rammed home to him that you have to be on time, and that was, that's not wrong. The Germans were on a pretty tight schedule because they knew they could only get so far.
Well, they only had the limited air cover.
Exactly. Yeah, they knew the minute Allied air passed.
It's one of the few things the film actually kind of gets right. I think
Allied air power would be the undoing of them, and it was. There's a table, and it's got like a little glass of wine on it, or champagne or something, and it's got like some forks and knives, and you don't really notice. You're seeing Robert Shaw and the Fat Major having a bit of a tiff, and then Robert Shaw sort of goes over to the table, and he uncovers this like little wax paper sort of parcel, and he goes,
"Yep,
look at this." And you're like, what the hell is that? You're looking at it's like,
this is why we're here.
This is why we're here,
sort of thing. We're here because of chocolate cake? What?
Yeah, and it's like this really like sort of brightly brown chocolate cake, in all its technicolor wonder. And you're thinking, what the hell? Like, what is he gonna? He's gonna ask him to share some? Like, it's so weird. Like, please have some cake.
Yeah, but he basically explains that that's why he's being so persistent with the attack on this town.
That's why he wants to crush the spirit of the American fighting man, because the Americans have the ability to have a fresh chocolate cake delivered to the front line.
Uber Eats 1944.
And I kind of get what they're saying, but I kind of don't.
They're trying to get across that, they're making this last-ditch effort in the face of the Americans are spending and wasting their fuel
to bring a chocolate cake up.
I suppose not wasting, but transporting cake across that's still fresh.
And then literally the end of that moment, it cuts to the intermission screen, and you're left there thinking like, okay, but cake, what? It doesn't process very well for me. It doesn't flow very well.
No.
If it had cut to him, like if he'd opened the cake and then he'd be like shown it to the major and then cut to intermission, I'm like, what? What the hell was that? Like,
I think he's a major general.
Major general. If it had cut, I go, oh, cake, what the hell's going on here? Like, this is interesting. But because he's explained it and you're trying to process what he's getting at, it's just jarring.
It's an odd scene. They were obviously trying to
it's a weird hill to die on.
It is. And they are trying to explain the futility of this German offensive in the face of Allied logistical power.
Is it pro-Ardennes offensive from the Germans' perspective at times? Because sometimes the movie does fall into that sort of weird sort of, who am I actually rooting for?
Well, I think that comes from, as we were saying earlier, with the Conrad Hessler sort of relationship. Being the only Germans we see, it kind of heavily focuses on them. And obviously, Robert Shaw basically carries this film, acting-wise.
He really does.
Henry Fonda's not bad. Charlie Bronson's okay, although his character is really badly written. And then, of course, we have Telly Savalas' character, who's sort of an afterthought.
We'll go into that in a minute. Robert Shaw's King Tiger suspension is buckling under the weight of carrying this movie. Telly Savalas' character, again, is just another great example of weird character sort of development, because he goes from this cheeky, chappy, black market dealer, I've got my
a bit of a spiv.
Merchandise, and his tank's called Bargain Basement or something.
Yeah, he's he's a wheeler dealer, basically, and he's trying to profit from the war. Like he says at one point, I came into this war poor, I'm not going to go home poor.
Which is fair. You think, oh, okay, he's going to be he's obviously the comic relief. At the time, he was known as a bit of a...
Especially if you've seen Kelly's Heroes.
Yeah, exactly. He plays a better version of this character, sort of, in Kelly's Heroes, I would say.
Yeah.
Highly
That's very fair to say,
from this movie. But he goes from sort of, counting up his stocks, trying to get out of the line so he can go and check on his merchandise, to getting to this brothel, I assume, that he's got all his gear in.
I think she's just a normal, nice lady, actually.
Really?
I think
really?
I assumed that she was just his business partner. I mean, maybe she was meant to be a prostitute. That didn't come across for me. He kind of accuses her of being a prostitute, and she's very shocked.
Because when when he asks that soldier later on in the film what happened to like a hotel,
Amblev. Yeah, in
I
Amblev.
thought
yeah.
you meant like the local whorehouse.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose with it being a hotel, you might
I
think that. I
don't
don't know.
Because where else could you hide contraband in a big way?
Rented room in a hotel.
Oh yeah, okay, fair enough.
The weirdest part of that scene is where he finds out that she actually like is in love with him,
yeah.
and he hasn't clicked on that. And then he sort of like thinks about it for a second while holding a chicken.
He tells the chicken to shut
Yeah,
up.
like there's this weird like comic relief effort kind of going on while he's trying to like decide whether he loves this woman back, and he kind of just goes, "Oh no, yeah, I do actually quite like it, yeah." And then when he finds out that the hotel has been leveled,
he turns into a gibbering Rick, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, he kind of becomes obsessed with like getting back at the Germans.
Kill all the Germans, and at the end, his tank gets a direct hit on the turret, and somehow they're still able to drive it and just sit in this smashed turret that's open with half his dead crew in it, thinking that he can take on the 6th Panzer Army with just a 30 caliber machine gun. But then in the end, he's the hero of the film because he manages to drive them all to the fuel depot. Yeah. It's like, so who's the fucking main character then?
There isn't one.
It's so annoying.
It's a really poorly written ensemble piece.
Yeah.
That's what the problem with this film is. It's just, it lacks cohesion. And it's just, it lacks cohesion with the writing, with the plot, and with the character sort of arcs that it creates. And it's...
Yeah.
And a casualty of that at the side of all this is historical accuracy.
Massively, yeah.
It's sacrificed to the gods of cinema making, where it's just like, nope, we've got a basic plot that we're going to hang all this pretty poor writing on, and that's what we're going with. And it's just, you end up thinking, this is a really like wasted opportunity. Like, people are going to watch this and think this is what the Battle of the Bulge was actually like. And they probably
still do. That's the sad thing, because this movie's not faded in.
Like on every Sunday afternoon.
I'd suggest this is the biggest film we've covered so far on the pod in like terms of popularity.
And thank you to everyone for hanging with us while we do some relatively obscure films. Don't worry, we're going to continue doing the obscure weird ones, but we will be getting to some probably slightly better known ones. But thank you for listening anyway and bearing with us while we do such obscure ones as Miss Grant Goes to the Door.
It's a shame that they sacrifice accuracy for spectacle, because I think if the film had stuck to its gun, stuck to historical guns a little bit more, then it would probably be really, really much more revered. Because if you want to sit down for 3 hours and leave your brain at the door and watch a mindless war flick, this isn't bad. I always say it's like a couple of beers and a packet of crisps, and you'll be all right. But it's not when you're sitting down going...
Definitely more than 2 beers, but yeah.
I mean, it depends on what you can stomach.
I think one of the problems is it's sort of, they've hung the film on an actual battle that occurred, but they've given it sort of a very loose affiliation to the actual historical accuracy of that battle.
Yeah.
So if they'd made a film set in late 1944, northwest Europe, but they couldn't do that. They've given it sort of like this central hook of it being the Battle of the Bulge.
They've decided it's a historical documentation of an event like Longest Day.
So chosen to do the whole operation.
Yeah, from start to finish.
As well, which is ambitious. And really, in a 3-hour film, you should have been able to do that. Because The Longest Day managed to cover the largest amphibious operation history's ever seen. A Bridge Too Far managed to cover the largest airborne operation history's ever seen. Why couldn't this film manage to encapsulate the battle in a more historically accurate way? I don't know. Because
now I think you chomp at the bit to tell the Bulge right, because it's so interesting. It's an overwhelming force versus an underwhelmed force. There's so much there, but yet this movie just doesn't bother to show any of it. But because I can't get on board with the plot, and because I find it very difficult to pinpoint people and characters because of the poor plot development, because of everyone is wearing pretty much the same jacket with no
unnecessary like train journeys.
Yeah,
just
sort random of train
shoehorned
in. No one's got insignia on. No one's got. Thank God I knew what sergeant stripes looked like. I couldn't tell who people were half the time because they look so generic. It's almost like we're not trying to offend or not trying to show any units that we're fighting in case we get it wrong, but we'll get the rest of the fucking film's plot wrong.
But at least we have Battleground, which did it better.
Thank God we have Battleground. and we will cover Battleground. You want to watch a Bulge movie, Battleground is your movie, and it's got snow.
Much more snow.
Much more snow. 10 out of 10. Would watch again.
But it's definitely going to be one that we're going to cover in a future episode soon, hopefully.
And it manages to do what Battle of the Bulge does in a much smaller scale, but show the whole thing as well through good filmmaking. And
very much like Theirs Is the Glory. Like it only shows the battle in Arnhem and Oosterbeek to a degree. It doesn't show, Grave or any of the other sorts of operations that were going on.
Yeah.
But you get the whole story through that microcosm.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a good movie should do if it's telling a historical plot, which Battle of the Bulge doesn't do.
And that's its main failing.
Exactly.
And that's why historians love to hate it.
And that's why we thoroughly dislike it at FOF HQ.
Thank you for listening, guys. Be sure to leave a like, comment, review on whatever platform that you're listening to, and subscribe there as well, so you hear future episodes of Fighting on Film. Big thank you to our executive producer, Katie McGuire, for helping with the show. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
Bye-bye.